Thanks, everyone. Well, it's a privilege to be here, and especially to be given this award, knowing how many great teachers there are in the science faculty. I'm from the School of Geography, Earth Science and Environment. Now, I wish I could make this as fun as the last two speakers, but I don't know if it's going to be, but please bear with me. Now, the keynote speaker raised a number of, many possibilities in terms of integrating technology into teaching. And after I reflected on that, I thought it's a little bit overwhelming, actually, thinking about, which path to go down. But at least I know there are many options available to us. Yoko, in her talk, talked about a student-teacher relationship. And I think for my teaching, that is something that is at the core in achieving successful teaching. It's about building a mutual respect and trust. My motivation for teaching, and hopefully for my students, for me it comes from my students, and hopefully for some of my students at least, it comes from my teaching. So I'm just going to go through sort of step by step, what it is that I teach, why I do it, and how do I do it, and how have I used ICT technologies in my teaching. So I teach in geospatial sciences. Now, geospatial sciences is very technology heavy, I guess you would say. But I like to try and focus on the qualitative side of geospatial sciences as well. And I teach mostly face-to-face courses from numbers of students ranging from anywhere from 40 per class to around 350 per class. So the courses I teach, I have different strategies in terms of using technology to deal purely with one aspect, and that is the numbers of students. Why do I teach? I have a passion for for the subject, and I have a desire to try and pass that on, as challenging as that can be sometimes. To provide hands-on active learning. So the focus of all of my teaching is active learning, where the students are engaged in the process of learning. And as I said, there is that relationship that's formed. I have a door is always open policy. Of course, it's not always open, but I like to, as much as possible, have that policy with my students. This can be problematic, of course, when there are 350 students. To understand the strengths and weaknesses of my students, only once I understand the strengths and weaknesses of my students can I really target my teaching. And that is particularly the case for struggling students, late arrival students, and the like. Develop meaningful learning activities that meet the individual learning styles. So when I came to USP 3 years ago, I learnt very quickly, and something that I had some awareness of, having worked in education in the Solomon Islands briefly and in Kiribati, that in the Pacific, students have very different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, educational backgrounds. And it wasn't until I started teaching in that environment that I realized how really extremely different that actually is. And the last point, local context and global perspective. So making sure there is local context in terms of the teaching content that I'm using, but also trying to give a global perspective on the content. So I have a responsibility, and I like to always remind myself of this. Discouraging rote learning. We all know about rote learning and how it's not really a great way to learn or to teach. To be engaging and treat students like adults. Now really, this is the relationship that's formed between myself and my students, and I believe is the way that success can occur in terms of effective teaching. Encouraging feedback and questioning, prompt response times. So when students are contacting me when they have particular concerns, treating them with the respect and giving them the response they need in in rapid time, and encouraging collaboration. I really believe collaborative learning is, especially in the geospatial sciences, in what I teach, is really core to effective learning. So how do I use ICTs in education? As I've mentioned, it's really a foundation of what I teach. ICT forms a significant part of my teaching, both e-learning, I teach flexi schools, and also another example really to demonstrate this is from one of my courses, an online mapping exercise, which I'll briefly talk about a bit later. I think I don't really need to talk too much about what Moodle offers us, but I just wanted to go through some examples of the way I use Moodle in my courses, and hopefully, let's say, in an innovative sense. Before I talk about this, and something I failed to mention at the very beginning, was that in the time that I've been here, I've really worked as a collaborative team with my small team in the geospatial sciences, John Lowry and Nick Rawlings. They've really assisted me a lot as a teacher, and I think we work very effectively together. So a lot of these ideas have sort of born out of that teacher collaboration as well. And also to the rest of my colleagues in the school, and my teaching assistants, and of course mentors who provide a really important role. So I'll just jump to a couple of examples. I know I probably don't have time to cover all of these, even though I've written the slides, but I'll just go through a few of these to demonstrate the way I've utilised some of these tools in Moodle. So audiovisual. So very simple things, uploading lab demonstrations as videos, uploading audio-visual and sometimes just audios from lectures, trying to keep these short, drawing on public domain videos. My current approach is to just have a link to YouTube, for example, but I think I'm slowly learning that this is not ideal, taking it out of the Moodle platform. But there's a couple of ways they use audiovisual technology. Lectures, really the focus in my courses is to bring the lectures into the lab. So giving the students enough time to work on the exercises, but really elaborating on what is occurring in the lab from the lecture material. The constraint with this is that it discourages students from coming to lectures because they know that they'll hear a lot of this in the lab environment. Of course, there are ways to get around this, which I'll talk about a bit later. Audiovisual aids obviously give flexibility to students, and it puts the onus and responsibility on the students to look at this material, which will contribute, to their assessments or to other parts of their learning. And it's just another, I guess, alternative tool that will cater to particular individual learning styles. I know from feedback I've received, some of my students, they never look at the audio-visual aids, while others rely on these. So it's really drawing on that different styles of learning. Discussion forums, I think all of us who use Moodle, we use discussion forums, and really what I found is the most, well obviously as a communication aid, but a great thing about the discussion forum is I can get a sense of particular students and the way they engage where they wouldn't otherwise do that outside of an electronic environment, where they're not actually going to be engaging by talking, but you can see they get a lot of stimulation in that kind of engagement, and it develops a lot of students' confidence and really a sense of ownership of what they're in their learning. Student feedback. Only recently have I started bringing student feedback surveys into one of my courses, So rather than just relying on the end of semester faculty feedback, trying to, as a process of, well, as part of the monitoring and evaluation of my courses and improvement, trying to bring that into the course during the semester, and where possible, integrating changes during the semester. So one example, extra tutorial lessons would be much appreciated for students facing difficulty. If I receive this feedback in week 5, I can implement that in week 6. So it's a very effective way to try and improve my course. Online assessment, so quizzes, for example. I learnt this last year from one of my colleagues, John. Really effective way to engage, an effective way to engage students in assessment, and also to make my job easier so that I can, put my time into other ways of either improving my courses or into research or administration, etc. The timing constraints that can be associated, they're associated with quizzes. Really, this teaches students about time management and organisational skills. So it's not just about the content that they're learning, but it's about the process of, managing their time, and about, really that sort of broader aspect of becoming a good student at the end of their program. Uploading assessments, so using Dropbox functions. This is really useful. For example, I can specify the type of feedback to the students, so they're aware of what is expected of them and the marking criteria. So they can study and they can upload their assessments having a good sense of what the expectation is from me, and therefore what the expectation of the course is. Obviously, there's other benefits, such as being able to identify plagiarism through Turnitin, which we're all familiar with, and again, having a timing constraint. So again, this assists the students in terms of management and organisation and time management. And lab class sign-up and attendance, I think we all use these. Again, really this is just a good way to record electronically, and for reporting purposes at the end of the semester, it's a very quick and efficient way to be able to bring this information into the reporting process. Use of Moodle Groups, so late arrival and at-risk students, without having targeted ICT sort of tools, managing late arrival students and at-risk students and giving them the best opportunity, it's very difficult. And these students are particularly late arrival students, are at a significant disadvantage because they have a lot less time than other students. So by setting up particular groups and being able to use those to then see where it is that certain students are struggling, and also to be able to monitor their performance much faster, and then to be able to address any issues that are arising well before it becomes a problem in week 13, for example, of the semester. And a few other tools, report logs and activity reports, etc. I really utilise very important tools, obviously SMS messaging, and a number of other resources. Links to student support, it's obviously very important, and I find it extremely useful in all of my courses. Okay, so what I wanted to do now is just sort of move away from that and just talk very briefly about an exercise that I integrated into my first year course beginning in 2014, and have continued to do that for the previous 2 years as well. An online mapping exercise. This is just an example of how I've integrated technology in a way that student engagement in the content and in the process has been enhanced. So this was a collaboration with here.com, which is essentially, we'll just say Nokia in Australia. So the exercise really to have students create mapped data, either using smartphone technology or directly online, and identifying whether it be locations or roads or other landscape features from where they come from themselves, from their own geographic environment. And by doing this, the sense of sort of ownership and engagement I find from the students is remarkable, because they're essentially creating a map of their own local environment. So it's not just, identifying particular features in Fiji, in Suva, for example, but having students really engage in the process with something that is very familiar to them. So it's really bringing that local context into the learning, and it's very interactive and it becomes more personalised. And I found it a very successful tool in my first year course. I also, beginning in 2014, have been involved in teaching a targeted program of flexi schools in the Marshall Islands, and I will be there later this year to teach the last of 4 geospatial science courses. And in that program, it's both online, in a sense it's blended, it's face-to-face, using video conferencing, etc., really drawing on multiple technologies and multiple forms of engagement from students in order to teach that course. So just that second point, so I incorporate my own research activity into the teaching. So when I'm in the Marshall Islands, I have the students doing data collection and engaging in the exercise from my own research activity. And I use a variety of tools, ICT tools, to deliver this. So Moodle, video conferencing, Skype calls, short training videos on how to use field equipment, and online tutorial activities. So it's really drawing on a number of different tools. Okay, I just noted that my time's up, so just a couple of more slides. A couple of planned future activities I'm interested in incorporating into my courses. Open educational resources. I've only really become aware of this last year, and really the opportunities for incorporating these and adapting to varied needs of distant learning students in particular. And obviously, this will potentially reduce the time needed for me to prepare up-to-date learning materials by drawing on materials that are being developed elsewhere. The risk, of course, is that it's not really a localised content, and this, really need to be aware of that. MOOCs, so integrating MOOCs, one of my colleagues, Nick Rawlings, he's already began looking at using MOOCs in his courses, and I think this is a really good way to engage my students into sort of global happenings in my area of teaching. Okay, so how has broadly ICT influenced my learning? So to empower students through increased sense of ownership and responsibility, as I talked about. Creating independent learners due to separation. Now, this is one area where I think we have to be very careful with integrating or overuse of technology in teaching by creating a separation from between the teacher and the student. Now, there is a risk of this happening with too much technology or with sort of inappropriate implementation of technology in learning. Encouraging innovation and lateral thinking. So I know for a number of my students already, by making a lot more of the content online driven, students, they're thinking more laterally in a sense. And it's also encouraging my students, as well as me, to become more innovative. Students become good data managers. And this is very important in my field. It's a very difficult concept to pass on sometimes. But I think I'm already seeing that difference by integrating technology. Obviously, automating tasks frees up my time, and it's well suited to particular students who may be disadvantaged, distance students, working students, etc., who can't come to regular classes. Challenges. So that first point really is the main point I wanted to touch on here. So I won't list through these. So increased use of ICTs in teaching coupled with a large and overwhelming institution can be isolating. Now I've seen this already, you know, in my 3 years teaching at USP. I see that isolation, or I see that, you know, students who are away from home, students who are not from Fiji, or from Suva in particular, you know, there is often a sense of isolation, and increasing use of technologies may in fact increase this sense of isolation for those students. So really just to make the point that it's careful consideration is needed in the process of incorporating ICT into teaching. But obviously, you know, there's so much opportunity in the process of doing that. And I think I'll leave it at that because I'm probably a few minutes over time now. Questions?